Hi, Kirsty. Thank you so much for joining us. It's very exciting. I love chatting to you. Every time we chat, every time we do training, there are so many different things that I take away. So let's start by you introducing yourself.
Yeah, thank you. It's so wonderful to be here. So, my name is Kirsty, as Kat just said, and I run a wellbeing consultancy called Natural Rays. And our focus is around supporting women and people that menstruate or transition through menopause in the workplace. So, we provide lots of different support structures, whether it's awareness sessions or manager training to essentially tackle the gender equality issue in the workplace and to support women to equitably engage in the workplace and not have hormonal, menstrual, menopausal symptoms holding us back from our full potential.
Amazing. And we've done so many different angles on this together. We've done PCOS, we've done periods. It's just a minefield, isn't it? Having
It
female
is.
biology, it's like it's just the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many phases that we go through, phases of our menstrual cycle, stages of life that we transition through. And we have the honor of doing that in the workplace. So I know we're going to get onto it, but this is why this conversation is important to happen in the workplace, because whilst we'd love to be able to leave everything at the door, what we are experiencing will inevitably come into our experience in the workplace and how we can show up.
Yeah, so that was what I was going to ask you first, actually. I realized we had questions planned, but I want to talk about why this is a workplace issue first and foremost, just because
Mm.
I hear all the time, especially with organizations in different countries than the UK. I feel like in the UK we're fairly up on, yeah, we need to talk about this and we know why. I see loads of period products in toilets, in workplace toilets, and every single time I do, I'm like, that is cool. Free vending machines. I mean, it's just really heartening to see, but there is still a gender health gap, which we'll talk about in a minute. But let's start first off to capture everyone's attention. Why is women's health a workplace issue?
We all, I would imagine, know the statistic, like women are 51% of the population. Depending on what sector you work within, will depend how many of that population is within your workplace. But, if we used law as an example, what we're seeing in that sector is actually the percentage of women representation is much higher. If we look in tech, it's a little bit lower, below 50, whereas in law, it'd be more like 70. So it is a workplace issue because it is impacting half of the population directly. We have that population is having a lived experience of period issues or hormonal issues that might impact their fertility or menopausal symptoms. But then we also have that indirect impact. And this is something that I passionately talk about, that it isn't just a women's issue or an issue that is impacting the person with the lived experience. It has that ripple effect. So most people will know somebody that will be going through menstruation or menopause. So it is our obligation as well as leaders in organizations to support those people. So it impacts more than just the person experience it. And this is the power that workplaces have, organizations have, is to support people outside of the workplace as well. So in a lot of the work that I do, we try as much as possible to engage those without lived experience. And a lot of the conversation comes up around how can I support my partner to support me as I'm going through, insert whatever they're going through. This particular conversation was around perimenopause. So there is a way that workplaces can support not only their own staff, but they can then empower others to actually have awareness of what are these issues that are impacting over 51% of the population.
I mean, it's massive, isn't it? It's so massive. And it's almost unbelievable that until about what, 5, 10, 5 probably years ago, we weren't talking about women's health in the workplace. It was a, oh my gosh, don't talk about that. But I'm really proud of the UK in how
Mm.
far we've come in terms of being able to say the words and have the discussion out loud. I think it's great. We definitely still need more men in the conversation. But I'm really proud of us in terms of how we will use that language and we'll talk openly way more than we did in the past about things. So let's talk about the gender health gap. So you talk about the gender health gap a lot. What is the
Mm.
gender health gap?
Yeah, so anyone that has lived experience as a woman or a person that menstruates will have their own story to tell around their experience of going to the doctors or other healthcare providers. Unfortunately, that is the unfortunate state. And what we are experiencing at the moment is that women are typically living longer, but we are living in worse health. So we are spending 25% more of our lives in poorer health than our male counterparts. And that really is a legacy of the fact that women's health or women's bodies were not included in clinical trials. So there's a lot of medicine, there are a lot of procedures, there were a lot of diagnoses and procedures that we've just assumed that because they work on men, that women are small men and that they're going to work on us. So before 1993, this always blows my mind, women were rarely included in clinical trials. So this is the gap that we are living with. And there is, it's very slow to progress. And it is a blessing and a curse being a woman because we are naturally complex. We have these hormonal shifts. Every day for us is different hormonally. That makes us really hard or harder to study. So, back in the day where they were like, oh, well, we don't have to study on women because that's complicated. We'll just do it as men and we'll just assume that that will be true. Women are more likely to die of a heart attack because we experience it so different to what we know as a heart attack. So that's just an example in terms of the research, so why there is actually that gap. But then in terms of our experiences, women are much more likely to experience gaslighting, where they are not having their pain taken seriously. And this is worse for women, but then women of color, so Black women, are also then more likely to have their pain disregarded. So that's what we mean in a nutshell when we talk about the health gap. So I don't know if you've seen the news recently around, in England, I think this with the women's sort of like health initiatives and the women's health hubs were sort of scrapped as part of the plan. And I think in some correspondence, they were talking about it and saying, well, actually, we should focus more on men's health and men's health initiatives. And I can't remember who spoke up and said this, but I need to find her name and quote her. And she said, well, we already have a system in place for men's health. It's called the NHS. The NHS wasn't designed with women in mind. And, we're still working within that structure. So the gaps in the knowledge that we have about women's health then creates delays in treatment, in diagnosis. The shocking statistic that women with endometriosis, which is, in a nutshell, debilitating period pains, but that's not the crux of it at all. But just if somebody isn't sure what endometriosis is, women, it's taken them 10 years to get that diagnosis. And to get a diagnosis is really invasive. We have to go through surgery to actually have that diagnosis. And then the treatment protocols, again, there's not much hope when it comes to that. And it's because there is so much research lacking around it.
This is an area of gender equality which boils my blood. You referenced some data, and I read Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. And if you haven't read that book yet, please go and read it immediately. But beware, you'll have to put it down a few times just to take some deep breaths because some of the stuff in there, like for example, the diagnosis of things like heart attacks in women, is because it shows up differently. We're different kinds of humans. It's wild, isn't it? And it's really terrifying. We did an event all about endometriosis the other day, and I couldn't actually believe it. It stayed with me, and I think I've thought about it every single day since, just because of the stat. 1 in 10 people who are assigned female at birth will have endometriosis, and it's just and it's very much misunderstood. And there'll be people in the workplace, these symptoms are just, as you say, debilitating. You cannot function when you're having an attack, and nobody knows about it. It's wild how many women will be in the workplace right now having a day where they're having an attack of symptoms and they're suffering really badly and don't have anyone to tell. So
Yeah.
I
And I think I went to an event yesterday and I love it when I go to networking events and I end up sitting in like with the person that I need to be sat by. I think it happens quite often. And this woman is struggling to get an endometriosis diagnosis. And we were talking about how it impacts her in the workplace. And she was saying exactly what you said. Not only is she having to navigate her role and the mental load of trying to get a diagnosis on top of the physical and psychological symptoms that it brings. And then, it's a toss up between, do I be open in the work environment and share what I'm going through? There is still a concern that we might then get looked at as, oh, well, you're not able then to do your role, or you're not able to progress, so that you then might, even more so than just by being a woman, get overlooked for promotions. So I think we forget that there's the psychological and the physical symptoms, but then there is also this emotional additional stress of what I call healthcare admin that we're thinking about, rearranging appointments, the heartbreak of having an appointment cancelled on you. All of this is going alongside us in the workplace.
Oh my gosh, it's just such a huge factor in gender equality in the workplace that we're just not talking about enough still, even though we're open about some things. Actually, there's a lot of very serious things that we're not talking about. So let's talk about that a bit more then. So there's already gender imbalance in the workplace, as we all know. How have you seen women's health issues, or the lack of conversation about women's health, the lack of focus, playing a role in keeping those gaps open?
It becomes really common, or maybe more noticeable, in senior levels, potentially, in terms of like more noticeable for us to see in data. There's a lot of things that are hard for us to see, but especially in senior roles, because there is this perfect storm that is happening typically for women that are progressing in their career. And maybe if they've chosen to start a family, they've had some time away and now they're coming back into the workplace postpartum. And I want to acknowledge that postpartum means your life post children. It's not just like a 6 month phase or a 12-month phase. You are a different person after you've had children, because you've been through a massive change. And there's so much around that as a separate aspect as well. But typically then women are coming back into the workplace postpartum. So we already have, potential nutrient deficiencies. There's so much that we're then coming back into the workplace. And because we are typically having children later in life, there is this perfect storm that's happening of women coming back into the workplace postpartum, wanting to progress again in their career, and then perimenopause will start to happen, or the hormonal fluctuations. As we get into our 30s, our hormones start to decline. So those amazing hormones like estrogen, which is great for our motivation and our brain and our mood, really starts to fluctuate so wildly on a day-to-day basis. It's not just something that happens over the cycle, it's like a day-to-day fluctuation. And then progesterone will decline. So that hormone that helps regulate our stress response and regulate how we tolerate stress. So this perfect storm is happening at this time when women would like to progress in their careers. And it's meaning that we are seeing more women dealing with things like imposter syndrome, or questioning their ability in a role that they used to thrive in. So there's a lot of questioning whether they can manage in that same role, or whether they, because of the symptoms that they are experiencing, maybe some of the psychological symptoms, which are the first symptoms typically in perimenopause, is noticing changes in confidence. Maybe there'll also be those physical symptoms that we don't talk about enough, like itchy skin, dry skin, those things that we probably wouldn't even think, how would that impact somebody in the workplace? But if you imagine having to wear your normal working clothes when you're going into the office and your skin feels like it's on fire, not just from heat, but just like your skin just feels itchy, there's all these additional things that are happening. And as I've said, like this perfect storm is happening around the time when women should be progressing in their careers, should be earning more money, or should be, getting more equal pay, but it's not happening. And more women are deciding, maybe I'll go to a part-time role, or I will change my role, or really deciding, actually, I don't think I'm capable of this anymore, and completely leaving the workplace. So I feel like in the data, it's more noticeable there. But also there's a lot of other things that are happening as well, as we've sort of talked about, where a lot of women are struggling with diagnoses. And if they're not working within a culture that has open conversations about a variety of topics, doesn't need to just be about reproductive health and women's health in the workplace. But if we're not in that type of workplace, then colleagues are less likely to share, and then are therefore less likely to get the additional support and maybe flexibility that's available to them.
It's such a depressing topic, isn't it, Kirsty? It's hard to find. I'm a very positive and optimistic person, and the topic of women's health, it just makes me feel so powerless to change anything. So, like we're having the period chats, and we're talking about this stuff much more openly, albeit men, please join the conversation. But we're talking about it a lot, but it's not just talk, is it? It's not just okay, it's great that we're having these conversations. There's a much bigger, it's leading into a much bigger thing, isn't it? It's leading into, first of all, we're putting period products in the toilets, we're having conversations about menopause, having conversations about periods. And then what is the next step that organizations need to take? Because I feel like sometimes, because that is a really important first step, as you just said, being open to those conversations and, people in the workplace hearing that and going, do you know what? We've had those conversations, we're talking about this. Maybe I'm safe to mention this to my boss, to mention this, to, mention that I'm feeling anxious and that, I've heard so many women say, I lose words, in perimenopause, where I am through the front door, standing in the hallway. I'm empathizing hard here. And you're not taken seriously by medical professionals unless your hormones are at a certain level. So you just have to live with it. Sorry, you go through this. And so many women are saying it's the losing words and the losing your train of thought. And that then having a knock-on effect to, oh my gosh, I've got to go and present, or I've got a really crucial meeting. What if that happens here? The confidence knock on, all of that stuff. So what have you seen in organizations where period chat and menopause chat has led to the next thing, and what have those next things been?
Yeah, it really differs from organization to organization, but I'll share a few examples. And I think this is where representation at senior level is so important, because the organizations that have managed to create this culture that I think we would all love to work in, where conversations just sort of happen freely and we kind of hear things happening around us and normalized, is that there are normally people with lived experience of menopause or menstruation on the senior team level, having that influence on the C-suite. There's that representation, and often it's where they have shared stories of their own experience. So there's one example of a woman who was like one of the first employees in a tech company and was the only woman on sort of the senior leadership team, and she was going through early menopause. So she'd just come back from postpartum. So I don't think her colleagues would expect. And again, this is a really great thing to think. It's like, I think sometimes we have this perception of what a menopausal woman's going to look like. She's going to be of a certain age. She's going to, and I think that's just not true. So they were then influenced by this lady who was probably in her late 30s going through early menopause, and was just very open about her experience. But what that meant was that she normalized the conversation about exactly what you said. She'd be in a board meeting and would be forgetting words. So would just be saying to them, look, the brain fog is really hard, really heavy today. I'm just struggling a little bit. Can you be patient with me? This then opened up conversations for some of the men in the room to then be like, oh, I've got a safe place here for me to have a conversation with this woman about what I'm experiencing at home. How can I support my wife? So again, we're talking about this ripple effect that happens in the workplace and it ripples outside of organization. So that's one example. Then we have like more formally outside of doing, building on those awesome things that you've just talked about, period products in places where people can access them freely. Having those stories and hearing a variety of voices of experiences of what's going on. And then, definitely paying homage and being aware of the awareness days. They're there for a reason. Those awareness days and awareness months are there to help us all have information about what's going on. But then building on that is then how can we embed this, whether it's in our HR plans for the year, whether that's employee well-being initiatives, how can we embed these? Are we able to put some policies into place around flexibility? If we have a menopause policy, do our colleagues know that that can also apply to menstruation? So what I really love helping organizations is so many organizations are already doing really great things so that they don't know that those things can then help all these different pots of people, and we need to bring everybody on the journey with us. So then, how do we do that? Through manager training. So they're the first line of conversation typically if somebody is struggling. So helping them to feel confident having conversations which might have felt a little bit awkward. So we're just building confidence of people being able to say certain words in the workplace. But also importantly, I think, is to help managers, leaders in organizations to know it's okay that you don't know anything about this condition or this symptom that somebody's explaining, because I feel that just as humans generally, we want to, we feel that we should know a lot about certain things, and we always want to, like, naturally want to help people. Just knowing that most people just want to be listened to. So if somebody is struggling in the workplace as a manager, as a leader, maybe even as like a well-being champion or mental health first aider, you're the people that are going to be hearing these conversations. Just know that more often than not, just providing a space for that person to be heard is all that we need to do. We don't need to be offering solutions. Yes, then it's great to be able to know what else the organization has, to be able to signpost people to. So I think the manager training, as well as that kind of like mental first aid champion training, and having the awareness about how these hormonal shifts can impact people in the workplace is really key. And then more recently, working with organizations to actually put this aspect of support, so whether it's menstrual health support or menopausal health support, into leadership development programs, and actually acknowledging that. So whether it's a person that's going to be going through leadership development and going to be having this experience themselves, for them to have some support around that as well. And also, what support is available for that person that might be struggling in the workplace, especially at the senior management level. Because often a lot of the initiatives that we see, which are great, are sort of more at that kind of grassroots entry level. If we use menopause cafes as an example, these are really helpful places for people to know that there's support that they can get from their co-workers, and we can share stories. But what's happening is that there might be a lot of more senior leaders in an organization that maybe don't want to go to a group and openly sort of say, I'm really struggling at the moment, because they might be worried about how that might be perceived, how that might look for them in their role for people that they are leading. So actually providing support structures for senior leaders that are going through that. And that can look like obviously one-on-one support, obviously signposting to a lot of other, employee assistant programs, those types of things. So those are just a few initiatives that I've seen work and that I support organizations with as well.
Brilliant. I mean, that company that you talked about where she was able to be open in the presentation. In my day to day, People tell me they're having a hot flush. They tell me they're in the right slap bang in the middle of perimenopause all the time. They've lost words. Like, we will talk about this stuff completely openly and never have any airs and graces or worries about what the other person would think. And so I'm kind of protected from it in a way. But I just feel so much that, this people are not connecting the dots between, well, why are we talking about periods all the time? Why are we talking about menopause all the time these days? Of like, that is the most important thing that you can do for 51% of your workforce is get the conversation out on the table and you be seen to be listening and joining in and taking it seriously. I've got one more thing that I want to ask you because my daughter is about to start her period. So she's scared. She's on the roller coaster already because it starts before the periods arrive. And I'm looking at her thinking, oh, my sweet girl. Um, I have always brought up my children to not be disgusted by periods. So that was something that I was really, really adamant about. I've always been open with them about everything, and no one has ever gone, ew, ew, that's disgusting. And if they have, we've talked about it. It's not disgusting. It's wonderful. It's how you are here. Like, you are all here because of this wonderful thing. And I love periods. Like, sometimes I'm like, just say it. What can people do to not raise a general? Because I think a lot of the reason why we don't talk about periods, we don't say the word cervix, and we don't say things like blood, we don't show red on the adverts. There's always some random blue fluid that goes into the thing. It's like it's not blue. Um, what can we do for the next generation so that anyone listening to this raising Gen Alphas can get them ready for a world where it's not disgusting and it's not like, ew, why are you talking about menopause? And people will be like, menopause. It's like, that's what I'm going through, and you think it's disgusting. Like, let's not do that. What can parents do to not propagate this situation any longer?
Yeah, I love this. And I think we all just need to be aware that if we have these kind of thoughts and feelings around a certain subject, I find it fascinating to check myself. If you have like, no, we don't talk about that. I always think to myself, like, where did that come from? I didn't grow, like, I didn't come out of the womb worried about the blood that I was like wrapped in. So it came from somewhere, and it has come from generations and it's been passed down. So it's an opportunity for us to go, why do I think that that subject is gross? And it's, what we experienced in school. I was the generation we hid tampons up our sleeve when we were going into the office toilets. We coughed when we were opening a tampon wrapper in a female toilet. It doesn't make any sense, but where did that come from? And I definitely do feel that there is this wonderful shift that's happening around like period positivity, and exactly that. Without this amazing process that we go through, there is no more life. So it really should be celebrated. And you raised a really great point there in terms of, you're very open to share that you're through the front door of your perimenopausal transition, and you have a daughter that's about to enter her experience of periods. And this is another thing that happens in the perfect storm if we have teenage daughters. Women are going through reverse puberty. That's what perimenopause is. And if you've got a teenage daughter at home, she's going through exactly very similar thing to you because our hormones are going haywire at the same time. So, I would love to be in your home at the moment. No, but just be kind to one another and just know that if you are experiencing really strong emotions, both of you in that household, you're going through very similar experiences hormonally, which I just find fascinating. So I think it always comes down to being open with the conversation. And again, I think, the men in our lives, that them being involved in the conversation and talking about periods as they're experienced in the home, and being shown, being willing to go out to the supermarket and buy the products that your loved ones need. This is all just everything is normal. So if it's not treated any differently to then when you fall over and have a cut and you put a plaster on, there's no reason for it to be any different. I think the wider topic that needs to be addressed. And this is where there are a lot of great advocacy groups happening, is the education, unfortunately, that our young girls and boys are receiving in school around periods and, sex education in general. I really don't think it has changed much since I was in school. And it's not coming from a particularly empowering place, but there's lots of groups out there that are trying to engage young girls in conversation and to empower them around these types of things. So if you feel that school isn't providing the type of education and support that you'd like for your daughter, just try and see if you can find those groups in your local area. I'm in South Wales, and there's an amazing group here called Girls to the Front, and they provide period education as well as like strength training and really a supportive environment for girls to be unapologetically themselves and to make mistakes. And those types of groups we need more of, because that's really going to be where we start to break down and continue to break down that stigma.
Oh, amazing. I just have so much faith in the next generation. Generation Alpha, I'm just pinning all my hopes on this lot because they are a cool bunch of kids. They really are amazing, amazing bunch of kids. And as for me and my daughter, the hormones, they're just haywire in our whole house. And she and I, we just hug a lot. She will storm off in floods of tears about whatever. She'll come down and be like, I'm sorry, mummy. And I'm like, don't apologize. It's hormones. And we just hug. We hug a lot. And then
Yeah,
the
that's
boys get
us.
in. We're like, Mummy's going through it. Serena's going through it. Let's all hug about it.
Yeah, and
And
that's the healthy response to it as well, isn't it? Of like, that's okay. And, raising young people is what a journey that is. And like I've learned a lot like through my goddaughter, where it's like it's healthy to have these emotions. I think my generation definitely were like, we weren't encouraged to express our emotions. So I think that again comes into that conversation, doesn't it? Of like, this is a normal experience and it will pass, and then you're still loved, you're still safe. So yes, they're very lucky to
exactly. And
have
you're not
you.
alone. You're not going through it alone. I'm still going through it at my age.
Yeah, she's probably like, when is it going to get better, mummy?
Give it 5 years. Oh my God. There is a period in your 30s I did find where I was like, okay, this is great. It's a very brief period, and also you're raising tiny children at the same time. But yeah. Oh, Kirsty, you have been amazing as always. You know what? We turned it around because I was feeling quite hopeless at the beginning, and then we turned it around because there is plenty of stuff we can do. And if we get them young and we educate them young, we bring the men in the conversations and also get the men talking about, yeah, I go to the supermarket to buy my wife's tampons. What about it? It's not a big deal. Like, get them to be, that's a great way to show allyship, isn't it? And them not be disgusted, and show to the boys in their lives, it's not disgusting. It's fine. Let's go get this. And then in the workplaces, let's start having those conversations openly, because you might think it's why are we still talking about this? But actually, it's opening the door and giving permission and an invitation to employees to come with whatever things that they may want to discuss. So this has been great. Thank you so much, Kirsty.
Thanks, Kat.